I've been in ministry for a long time, and I can say with some authority what the most common lie spoken in America is today. Here it is. I have read the terms of service. Every one of you who has signed up for a new account or who has downloaded an app has said, yeah, of course I've read those, and none of you have. Honestly, if you have, you're such a big nerd for having done so. And actually, the companies that design these things plan on us not reading them. They're hopeful that we won't read them. That's the reason they're so long. That's the reason the print is so small. They are counting on us being frustrated, not wanting to deal with it, and just clicking the box without reading what we are actually agreeing to. Got some bad news. You've agreed to some pretty outrageous things. I mean, you really, really have. Without knowing it, you have. Let's use Meta, for instance. If you're on Facebook or Instagram, when you clicked the terms of service, you agreed to let Meta sell your face for advertising purposes. You agreed to let Meta map your face. You agreed to let Meta track you. That's the reason you can talk about bug spray with your wife, and the next thing, you've got ads all over your phone for bug spray, which actually happened to us. Super weird, but we didn't read the terms of service. All of that is just helping you understand that you don't really get the apps for free. You're giving away a lot. It's costing you dearly. You just didn't know it was because you don't read the terms of service. Keep that in mind, if you would please, as you open your Bibles to Luke chapter 14, verse 25. In our passage today, Jesus provides the terms of service for what you are committing to if you want to make the commitment to follow Him. What we'll read together today isn't a description of the luxury model of Christianity. What Jesus is describing in our verses today is entry-level Christianity. What He is describing for us is the entry point into the faith. And here's how we know He's talking about the entry point and not the luxury model. You see in verse 25 where it says, "Now great crowds accompanied Him." That triggers for us that Jesus is not speaking the words we are about to read to a holy huddle of only the most committed to Christians. He is not talking about special forces Christianity. What He's doing is He's looking at a great crowd of people following Him, excited about Him, wanting to sign up, wanting to join the movement. But rather than present an attractive, sweet deal, Jesus holds up the terms of service to their faith and says, you want to follow me? This is what you're agreeing to. And there are really just two main components to the terms of service for following Jesus. Here's the first one. Jesus says, you want to follow me? Give up everything. Give up everything. Let's see this together as we keep reading in verse 26. He's turned to these crowds ready to sign up, and He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is Yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Not to the Holy Huddle, not to Special Forces Christians, to the crowd ready to sign up. Jesus, for those of you of a certain age, would have clearly flunked the Dale Carnegie course. He's got a load of people ready and willing to sign on the dotted line, but rather than operating by the ABCs of salesmanship, always be closing, Jesus is operating by the ABCs of the kingdom of God, always be confronting. Now, Jesus places three, if you've tracked with it, three unbelievable demands in front of these people who claim they're all in. I mean, they're ready to follow him. Here's the first condition: hate your family. Hate your own life. Now, we need to understand that the word hate here is what linguists call a Semitism, a word whose meaning is influenced by Semitic language and culture, Jewish language and culture. And the Jews would frequently use the word hate differently than we use it in a modern sense. They would use it in the sense of love less. So when in Genesis 29:31, for instance, the author says Jacob hated his wife Leah, we know from the verse before that what is meant is that he loved Leah less than his other wife Rachel. The same is true in Deuteronomy 21:15 when Moses lays out how the treatment of wives who are loved less than another wife are to be played out. The English translation of the word in Deuteronomy is unloved, but the word in the Jewish language is hate. So what Jesus is saying isn't that we must actively hate others and even our own life in the modern sense of that word. But before you say, well, boy, that's good, I mean, we do understand that he is quite clearly saying, and his hearers are quite clearly understanding, that to follow him means to love him more than our family and more than our lives, meaning that if it were to come down to it, we will choose our Jesus over our family and over our very lives. The low cost of our commitment to Jesus living in the religious liberty that America provides can deceive us into thinking that, yeah, we'd choose Jesus over everything because generally we've never had to choose Jesus over anything. But when I see the pinch point between our lives and what Jesus says here, it typically shows up in how we think about our family. And please understand that I'm talking about much more than church attendance and what we're about to think through. I'm talking about the ease with which we fall into prioritizing our kids' athletic or academic or artistic prowess over prioritizing them developing their faith and prioritizing that over their ability and development in serving God's kingdom through the church. And I'm talking about other times that I've experienced here and in other churches where parents actively worked against their child's call to ministry because it wasn't the dream they had for their child. I'm talking about the times I've seen parents shame their children about a stated call to international missions because they would say, well, it means that we won't see you or our grandchildren someday nearly enough. My point is that this is a bigger challenge, even in the freedom of America, than we realize. But it's Christianity 101. It's in the terms of service. Following Jesus means loving him above all else, even more than our families, even more than our lives. And to fail in making this commitment in the very beginning, Jesus says, means that you can't be his disciple. That's just the first demand under give up everything. The second in these verses that we read is that entry-level commitment includes the command to bear our cross and follow Him. This is an expansion on the bit about loving Jesus more than your very life. Entry-level commitment to follow Jesus means a willingness to die for Him. Bearing one's cross for us is a metaphor. People say that I'm Julie's cross to bear. It's a metaphor. But it wasn't a metaphor for them. In Christ's world, there was no missing His point. Loving Jesus more than life includes giving your life if it means that by keeping it, you're denying Jesus or disobeying Him. Think about what Jesus is saying. He's saying that signing up to follow Him means in the very beginning that you would be more willing to die than deny Him or disobey Him. And now think about how we, preachers included, rationalize the values we hold or the actions we take or the words we say in order to continue to engage what, by biblical standards, is quite clearly sin. In the terms of service, the box you check before downloading the Jesus app into your life, Jesus says that you would be more willing to die than to rationalize the sin that you and I routinely rationalize in our lives. The final demand of these verses is that we must renounce all that we have. As Jesus uses the words renounce here, He's saying that to follow Him is to have such a disaffected relationship with our wealth, whatever our wealth might be, that we would be willing in a moment's notice, if Jesus demands it, to give it all up. So please relax here for a second. I'm not talking about you giving money to the church. Jesus isn't talking about giving money to the church. He's talking about a relationship that you have with wealth. Do you understand that? A relationship that you have with wealth. That you would be willing to surrender it rather than deny or disobey Jesus. Think with me about what that would mean at the different stages of our lives. When we're teenagers, just beginning to work, saving for a car, just some walking around money. Jesus is saying that the importance of having a car or money for dates or clothes should pale in comparison to the importance of following Jesus, to the point that we would be willing to surrender all of it to Him if He asked us to. When we are young and newly married, we typically, if you were like Julie and I, you have very little, if anything. So the challenge to a married couple would be you must be willing, with what little you have, to surrender it immediately. If holding on to it means denying or disobeying Jesus. It means saying Jesus is more important than your financial security. For parents with teenagers, we're consumed with paying for their college. For empty nesters, we are consumed with funding retirement. For retirees, we are consumed with making sure we don't outlive our savings. All of those things can become pinch points for obedience. And yet, in the terms of service, Jesus is saying that if you want to follow me at the outset, you have to have such a disaffected relationship with wealth that it means nothing to you if holding on to it means denying Jesus in some way. Love Jesus more than family. Be willing to die rather than deny or disobey Jesus. Renounce all of your possessions and the hold they have on you. And that is the follow Jesus starter kit. That's why Jesus says to commit to Him without considering the cost of it. It would be like starting construction on something without knowing whether or not you can complete it. Or it would be as foolish as a king going to war without a sufficient understanding of the terms of engagement. To commit to follow Jesus without knowing the true cost of following Jesus is to set yourself up for failure in following Jesus. And Jesus says this not to Special Forces Christians. He says that to people in the foyer. Before you come in the house, let me tell you what you're agreeing to. In the 90s, a church in Chicago and a church in Orange County, California, perfected what became known as the seeker-sensitive approach to church growth, an approach which dominates church life in America today. And it all started with a very good impulse. How do we get genuinely disaffected, disinterested, and almost defiantly unchurched people interested in the gospel again? But that good impulse resulted in the American church starting to round off the sharp edges of the gospel. Sin wasn't mentioned much, hell never mentioned, and the gospel plea began with the words, God has a wonderful plan for your life, so that then the gospel essentially became, come see how we can put Jesus to work for you. Compare that to the words of Jesus that we just read. Love me more than you love those closest to you. Be willing to die rather than deny me. Hold everything you own with an open hand, and then you can be my disciple. There is no get forgiveness in heaven and then work your way into it negotiation. Jesus is saying, love me more than you love those closest to you. Be willing to die rather than deny me. Hold everything you own with an open hand, and then you get forgiveness. Then you get eternal life. Then you get me. So while it is absolutely true that Jesus has a wonderful plan for our lives, it will cost you the life you have. It will cost you the life that you want for yourself, the dreams you have. It will cost your life. But lest you think that that's just too much, I want you to listen to what a 19th century British Christian J.C. Ryle said. Of all the things that will surprise us in the resurrection morning, this, I believe, will surprise us most, that we did not love Christ more before we died. When we get to heaven, we will not be saying, you know what, I just put too much into that. We'll be saying, I didn't put enough into it. This is what it meant? Absolutely, I'll give up everything for that. The terms of service for following Jesus has two main conditions. The first is give up everything. And I just wish that I'd been clever enough to come up with the second point on my own, but I have to give credit to a younger mind, Micah Hayes at the Ridgeview campus. Two conditions, give up everything. Here's the second thing Micah came up with, repeat until dead. Repeat until dead. Look at the last verses of the chapter. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is of no use either for the soil or, Jesus here, the manure pile. It is thrown away. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. You know, it's funny how we usually apply this verse. It's almost always used to justify Christians condemning other Christians who do not live up to a certain moral code that we single out as being the key, arbitrarily, for following Jesus. Be that code of loving others, or a code of moral discipline, or a code of prophetic denunciation. In other words, we use it to say that if we Christians don't model neighborly love as we understand it, or moral discipline as we understand it, or passionate rebuke of sin as we understand it, we will lose our influence in the world. We will not be salty anymore. But that's not the context of what Jesus is saying here. The context of this statement is found in what preceded it. So what Jesus is saying is this: if you do not continually model the commitment to Jesus that he just described, a commitment to continually willingness to give up everything, a continual willingness to give up all that you have in wealth and all that you have in life and all that you have in relationships. If you do not continually model that, you lose your influence in the world. Our influence in the world is not rooted in our values. It's rooted in our radical commitment to Jesus. And Jesus' words, not mine. If I do not continually model for a watching world an absolute all-in commitment to Jesus, what I call Christianity wouldn't improve a pile of manure. That's Jesus saying that. Now, will that result in a neighborly love? Yes. Will that result in a way of living that demonstrates the holiness of God? Yes. Will it manifest itself when need be, a passionate but loving rebuke of sin? Of course, but all of that is downstream of the main commitment. What stands out to the world, what an unbelieving world will finally find believable about Christianity, is when they see in Christians an unwavering commitment to Christ that is so comprehensive that it makes them literally immune to whatever the world might do to them. What's wrong with these people? Let's find out. It's Jesus. That's what Jesus is talking about here. And an honest review of the American Christianity of the last 100 years, the type of Christianity that all of us are steeped in, reveals how shockingly easy we are manipulated by worldly concerns and how scandalously we crave worldly influence. But the Christianity of the first 100 years of Christian history was just the opposite of American Christianity today. They could not be manipulated by fear of what was going on around them, and they would have laughed in the face of anyone suggesting that the key to their success was worldly cultural influence. American Christianity has everything. Everything. The first century Christians had nothing, and they changed the world. We cower in fear. Why? Why were they different? Because they understood that the call to follow Jesus at the outset was a call to give up everything and then repeat that surrender every day of their lives until they died. That is what Jesus is speaking to in verses 34 and 35. Having laid out the cost of following him, he tells everyone with ears to hear to listen closely. The kind of call he issues must be maintained in the heart of those called, or they lose their usefulness. So the evangelism best practice of the last 100 years, which is, do you remember a time when you gave your life to Jesus, isn't biblical. Not really. Because the authenticity of a commitment to follow Jesus is rooted in the ongoing character of our life, which bears witness to the past decision following Jesus. And that has incredible implications for how we think about whether or not we are really saved. Those who are really saved may not have a vivid memory of the moment of their salvation, or a vivid memory of the prayer that they prayed, or really even have a memory if they prayed at all. Modern evangelicalism would tell those people, well, then you clearly aren't saved. But the same modern evangelicalism excuses the person whose life bears little resemblance to the kind of commitment that Jesus is calling for here, because they can remember walking an aisle in Vacation Bible School. But Jesus in our passage and the New Testament as a whole teaches us to understand that the evidence of a past all or nothing commitment to Jesus shows up in an ongoing all or nothing commitment to live for Jesus each day. And in the grief when we fail in that commitment, and in the reliance on His grace and forgiveness to get up off the ground the next day and go for it again. And in our passage, Jesus tells us that is the kind of ongoing radical commitment that seasons the world. And without that kind of commitment, any claim to follow Jesus is worthless. Again, to use His words, not mine, would not improve a pile of manure. So these are the terms of service for following Jesus. Give up everything. Repeat until dead. Haven't you been encouraged this morning? What do you do with this? I mean, honestly, what is the application point here, and what are we supposed to do with this? I think if you're honest with yourself at all, you didn't understand the moment you surrendered to Jesus that this was the full implication of it, did you? I didn't. I'm the preacher. It's okay. I'm telling you, I didn't. But it's something like this. Every time I conduct a wedding ceremony, I ask young men and young women standing, I don't know, about right here, to make a commitment. Sickness or health, better for worth, until death do you part. And they always look at each other with these sappy romantic eyes and they say, I do. And in my head, just so you'll know, every single time I'm going, bless your heart. Seriously, I've been married 35 years. Love my wife dearly. I can tell you without a doubt, I didn't know the full implications of what better or worse meant. And don't talk to Julie on your way out. Neither of us did. You didn't either, did you? But if you're still married, here's one thing I can tell you about that day and making that promise. You were sincere. You were sincere. I didn't understand the full implications of the terms of service when on March the 26th, 1978, in a Sunday evening service on an Easter Sunday at First Baptist Church in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, where I stepped out and went down to the front to talk to my pastor, Ron Rice. I didn't understand the full implications of it. But I'll tell you what, I was sincere. Whatever Jesus wanted from me, I was willing to give. Best I could understand that as a 12-year-old. And my guess is that a good chunk of you understood that as well. But now you've been challenged with the depths of it. The depths of what this means. To be a follower of Jesus means that you give up everything and then you repeat that commitment daily until you die. And that's going to have the effect two ways in this room. Those of you who sincerely made that commitment, didn't understand the full implications of it all those years ago, just like you didn't understand the full implications of what it meant to get married all those years ago, are just going to remind yourself that's what it meant, and I'm all in. And whatever Jesus brings my way, I'm giving to Him. Everything is His. My life is His. My life is a vehicle through which He lives His life. You get that? But there are some of you who were only given the promise that if you pray a prayer, Jesus will go to work for you. And so you've reversed the flow of how this thing works. You think Jesus gives up everything for me to make my dreams come true. And Jesus says, you've got it backwards. You give up everything, and then I live through you. If you've never understood that, then this morning, before you leave, you have the opportunity to make that kind of commitment to Jesus. And even now, even after having heard this sermon and the words of Jesus, you don't understand the fullness of what that means. Even now, after almost 40 years of following Jesus, I don't understand where this is going to take me at the years I have left. But I sincerely give myself to it every day. If you're willing to do that and know that you've never done that, then right now, surrender yourself to follow this Jesus and what he asked. Just bow your heads and close your eyes.